Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I was joined by two amicable customers, Kate and Joe Sharp, to talk about their amicable divorce and unique co-parenting arrangements. Kate is a home educating parent and Joe works in IT, having given up his career in teaching during the divorce process. This was to be able to provide more income for the family. And in this episode, we talk about Kate and Joe's relationship, the early stages of their separation, and how they navigated the divorce process and negotiating a financial agreement using Amicable's service. We also talk about their co-parenting setup, and it was lovely to hear about Joe's new relationship and how the whole family can support it thanks to the amicable approach they've taken. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Kate, and welcome, Joe.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Hi, Kate. Thanks.
It's lovely to have you both. Thank you very much for agreeing to join us. I'm really interested to hear about your experience. So let's start at the beginning and talk about how you met and a bit about your relationship. So, Joe, how did you and Kate meet?
We met during Freshers Week at uni. We were out in one of those let's all get together in a really close room and shout at things kind of events that they host. And yeah, you were just behind me, weren't you, Kate? And we kind of got chatting. Yeah, that was when we met. And then we spent quite a lot of time at the radio station, which we both sort of turned up at the same time. And we worked together on a few things there.
And Kate, what was your relationship and marriage like before you separated? How would you describe it?
I'd describe it as cheerful, like we're both quite high energy people. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of adventures. It was quite a chatty relationship, which I really valued because I love to chat. And I think that really helps to kind of keep things connected. I would say it was fairly unusual in that I would describe it as like parallel tracks. Like we both had our own interests that we followed the whole time. We did things together as well, and we had mutual friends as well, but we always kept that sense of autonomy. We definitely weren't one of those couples that's just always in each other's pockets and always doing things together.
And so it sounds like you had a happy marriage, but at some point it started to become clear that things weren't working. So Joe, tell me a little bit about what happened when you started to realise that maybe the relationship had run a course.
It was weird. We sort of organically agreed on the same morning, like, yeah, I think we're done. But I think when we had our first son, that autonomy that we'd enjoyed and that like slight level of separation from each other that we sort of needed was gone. Frankly, it was just eliminated overnight. And then I think it was all a bit intense. And whilst we agreed on a lot of the big ticket items of like what we did as parents, it seemed like there were just endless tactical things that we were disagreeing about. I feel like it sort of started to get difficult then.
And how long had you been married before you had children?
Actually, it wasn't married. It was like 2 years, wasn't it, Kate?
Yeah, so we got married in 2011 in the summer, and then our first child appeared in spring 2014. So we'd been married like 2 and a bit years.
But we'd been together for like 9 before we got married.
Okay, so you'd had that time to really get to know each other and understand each other and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So it started effectively when you had children, things started to change. So Kate, from your perspective, how did you see the sort of children changing the dynamic of the relationship?
I think I kind of always wanted children as a kind of background sense. Jay was like the broodiest guy ever. He would go to like other people's parties and cuddle their children. And they'd be like, "You're a great guest at this party." So I think for him, perhaps it was harder with the kind of reality of like the day-to-day intensity of child rearing. And for me, I found it very natural. I think I'm a bit of like an earth mother, but I did also find it really consuming. So I think I spent a lot more of my identity as a mother rather than as a wife.
Okay. So how did that morning arise then when you sort of literally, it sounds like you sort of were both in a similar place. You've come from very different perspectives. You'd had quite different experiences of raising a child. How did it sort of all come together was it one conversation or was it over a period of time? Just, I think it's kind of quite fascinating to understand how you go about deciding the relationship has run its course, because I think sometimes how you do that impacts what you then are able to do in terms of moving forward together as co-parents and everything else. So tell me a little bit about how it all seemed to come together in one morning's conversation.
So we had some relationship counselling at the start of 2020. We had tried to kind of work things through and it was just proving really hard. So we got some professional help and that was really interesting. And, I found out some things about Joe that I'd never known, despite the fact that we'd been a couple for like 18 years. And there's just something about that therapeutic environment that allows those things to come out. So the relationship counselling, it did help. It helped us to understand each other better. It did not fix things. But then because 2020 was the lockdown year, Joe was not needed at the school. So he was at home. And actually, like for a good chunk of 2020, we had an excellent time. So the children had both parents at home. We all just kind of had adventures. The weather was lovely. It was fantastic. Then by the end of that summer, Joe had like a kind of family bereavement, and that brought up a lot of grief. And there had been some kind of grief in the situation before. And that was when we were like, actually, when it gets really hard, we are not turning to each other for support. There are other people in our lives that can support us better. And so, then we asked our friend to look after the children and we just went for this walk. And by the end of the walk, we're like, shall we just split up? But we both said it. So it was really nice because it was just like, we both agreed that it was the right time. It wasn't one of us pushing and the other one resisting, anything like that. I think we just drifted for a long time. And then eventually we were like, let's change things here.
So, Joe, did you feel similarly that perhaps the relationship counselling had brought up stuff that made you realise there were things that weren't quite right, but it also, on the positive side, had given you that positive enabler to have a conversation that maybe you wouldn't have got to beforehand without having that therapy?
Yeah, we always wanted to make sure that we tried to work things out. And I think the relationship counselling was an attempt to do that. But what we discovered was we were still friends and we have this, huge long history, quite a lot of mutual admiration for some of our, unique quirks. And that was all intact. And whilst that period of time during the lockdown was really nice, it was like, well, we functioned quite well as a team, but not as a couple. And whatever was left of the couple, it was just sort of readily apparent that wasn't really there anymore. It kind of got us back together so that we could then do this nicely, right? Like it kind of cleared a lot of the decks. Like, right, okay, so we're not a couple, but we're a team, so we can do this let's do it nicely as we can. I think we would always endeavor to do that. And it got us in a good place to do that. So yeah, I think it was extremely valuable from that point of view. But yeah, it was the morning. So when we had that walk, we invited the friend round, but that followed a morning where I don't even know how it quite happened. We both sort of looked at each other and went, are we just done? It was like, yeah, I think so. It's just really random. I don't think there'd been some massive argument the night before or anything like that, really. I can't actually remember what the night before. It's probably not good to dig it anyway. But yeah, and then we invited our friend over and went, well, let's just go and have a chat with this sort of possibility now a thing, having resisted it so long. And it just was very clear that like, yep, okay, right. Obviously, the logistics and that took quite a while to figure out. But, we were on the track then. And I think the hardest part was over.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? We don't have to say that the relationship breakdown has to be some big traumatic event. We've got used to that narrative, haven't we? Where someone's got to be in the right, someone's got to be in the wrong, there's got to be a victim, there's got to be drama, there's got to be, wailing and gnashing of teeth. But I think what you represent is what, a lot of people who come to us say, which is, the relationship has run its course. We loved each other at the start. We will probably always love each other as as parents or whatever. but we just don't want to spend that time and be, a couple anymore. And I think it's just so important that we acknowledge that for a lot of people, this is how it goes. It's not what's on EastEnders. It's not Kramer versus Kramer or The Split or anything else. It's a lot more basic, guttural, and just two people coming together who can communicate well and say, you know what, I think this has run its course, which is exactly what you've just said. Sorry, Kate, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so I was just reflecting as well that during that summer of 2020, we celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary. And I kind of put loads of effort into it. I decided to repurpose my wedding dress as a tablecloth because it didn't fit me anymore. And then I turned like Joe's wedding shirt into some bunting. I made like a little replica of the cake. And it was really sweet. But again, it was that kind of like I was putting all that effort in because I kind of still wanted us to be like a couple. But it was quite one-sided, like it was only me sitting there sewing bunting. But I'm really pleased that I did it because I think it was a really lovely sense of closure, that I'd interacted with all those precious things. We had a great wedding day. It was lovely. It was really magical. And to be able to kind of process that with love was really important to me.
And I really like the real utilitarian element of wedding dress to tablecloth. I love that because there's something very practical about it, which when you're trying to split up amicably, that's what you focused on, isn't it? It's about turning something that has had its purpose and served a purpose into something different, but something that's going to serve you in your later life, in your next years. And I really like that as an analogy. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So you've had this conversation, you've decided it's definitely over. How did you find Amicable?
So this was through Positive News. So Positive News is all about good journalism, about good things. I have subscribed to it for years because I like cheerful things and I find like mainstream news it's really depressing and fear-based,
overwhelming, isn't it? Yeah.
Annoying. Like it's not my thing. So there was an article in March 2021 in Positive News that was called Untying the Knot, How to Have a Good Divorce. And I read it. And by that time we had decided to part ways, but we hadn't started any proceedings. But what that introduced me to was the idea of the no fault divorce, which I'm so grateful that we divorced at the time when that had come in. I think that's so critical for being able to tell everyone that it's no one's fault. It just happened.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who doesn't know, no fault divorce has come in and it's replaced the old fault-based system where you used to have to give the state a reason for the breakdown of the marriage, and that had to be either adultery or unreasonable behavior, or you had to have been separated for a long period of time. But now we have a system where it's no longer, rightly, any of the state's business, and you just agree to end the marriage, and you can do that without having to give any explanation as to why the marriage has broken down. But it also means you can either do it as a solo person, you can have a solo divorce, or you can have a joint divorce, so you can agree to do it together. So sorry, go on then, Kate. So no fault divorce came in, perfect timing from your perspective. It represented more of what you were about in the sense that it was nobody's fault. The marriage had just run its course, come to an end, and you wanted to go your separate ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'd brought this to me and it was just a no-brainer, frankly. I mean, I'd grown up in the, underneath the war zone of a terrible divorce where each person hires their own attack dog to play some awful zero-sum game. And I think part of, neither of us wanted that. And we saw there was less than zero value in it. So when we saw that this was an option, it was like, oh, well, there we go. We'll just do like that then.
So you decided to do the no fault divorce, and how did that progress? What happened then?
So I guess, Kate, you'd have contacted them based on the Positive News advert, right? And then we were put together with, I don't know what you call them, like the sort of solicitor, the person. We had Anthony, didn't we?
Divorce specialist, yeah.
Divorce specialist, that's it, lovely. And so he walked us through what that would look like. He kind of just talked us through each stage as we needed to know it. So we'd have enough information to do what we needed to, but without getting overwhelmed with all the medieval jargon, which is still bananas. But yeah, and so we had these 6 meetings. Now, they were spread over, like a year and a half. I think there were practical aspects about me moving out and changing jobs and stuff that we wanted to wait for, settle down, try and agree things between ourselves first so we could bring Anthony a bit more of a hey, right, we've figured this out now. This is what it looks like. And then he just kept us tethered to the legal process.
It sounds like the pacing of it is actually quite important from that perspective. Kate, do you think despite making a joint decision, you might have been in different emotional spaces, given what you were saying before about, you were the one who was still kind of at the point of wanting to put some effort in, and Joe perhaps wasn't quite in that same place. Do you think that pacing and understanding where you both were in the process was important?
I do think we were in the same readiness. It's just perhaps I'm a bit more symbolic and I like kind of gestures more. So I thought perhaps if I did the gestures, it might change things. I don't think it did. I think it was just a nice thing to do. I think the pace of the process was really helpful because I originally wanted it just done quickly. I was just like, right, that's it. Let's actually get this divorce now, and it was so beneficial that it was slow and it was easy, and it allowed me to kind of grow and develop and work out what life looked like after this. And actually, I'm really glad that it wasn't quick.
Yeah, and I think the thing about like the last anniversary, there was a sense from both of us, and I think this is sort of emblematic of where we'd sort of separated, right? There was a sense for both of us that we wanted to celebrate it a little more than we had done. I think we'd let a few other ones kind of slip by largely unheralded. I can't remember, what I did or whatever, but I think me and Kate measure this effort differently in terms of who's putting the effort in. So I do seem to remember we both had a sense that we wanted to make it special. And obviously, Kate did what she did. That was her way of doing it. But yeah, it was something we didn't really recognize. We didn't appreciate each other's kind of ways of putting the effort in. And that's one of those things that I guess was just always a bit different.
I think that's been much easier since we've parted ways as well. I think now that we're not living in the same space, we're able to do our own thing. And the bits that we're really well aligned on, we're still really well aligned on. And the kind of nuances that actually we found fairly irritating about each other, but they're not big things, we can just do in our own way. And there's nobody kind of sitting there going, oh, I just wouldn't have done it like that, and actually both of the ways are fine. One of us is not better than the other. We just have a slightly different vibe.
Yes, exactly. So it sounds like you've got the space to be individuals, and then you've got that time when you come together to co-parent and stay connected through that way. Just thinking back to the beginning of the process, so you find out about Amicable, you're allocated Anthony, who's going to be your divorce specialist to work with you. You've got that whole process stretching out ahead of you, and Anthony explains it as you go. But in that first meeting when you have to talk about the goals, so the first meeting we hold is a goals meeting, and we talk about what you want life to look like in the future. How easy was it to articulate right at the very beginning what you wanted life to look like?
I think we had some big lines that we could very much agree on there. So I wanted Kate to be under absolutely zero threat of losing a house or any of this sort of thing. I wanted various things that I'd seen be very difficult to just not be a factor. We did want to do the homeschooling if we possibly could. And so it was similar to the parenting. We agreed on a lot of these sort of big lines in the sand. So there wasn't really a lot of haggling. It was like, right, we want everyone to be comfortable, everyone to be looked after. I would obviously have to figure out how to move away. And at the time I was still a teacher, I just did not have the money for it. But there was like, right, well, we're going to sort that out. Go, do the other job again. So yeah, I guess that we were not quite sure what it would look like after the kids had grown up, because we got two and they're still quite little. But it was so far away that there wasn't much we could say about it sensibly that far in advance.
I found the process really interesting because, so as Joe mentioned, we home educate and there's loads of different ways to do it. In our relationship, Joe earns the money and I do the stay at home parenting, which involves various levels of education. And that's kind of perfect for us. Like it really works for us and for our children. And I want that to be able to carry on. And so did Joe. And it was really helpful because Anthony explained that, he went off and asked some of his colleagues who'd dealt with similar cases and explained to us that home educating is a similar choice to private education. As in, you either lose one income, which is home educating, or you spend a lot of money on tuition through private education. And so the court will kind of understand that we are happy to make that choice as long as the financial situation means that remains viable. So it was really helpful to have his perspective on that.
Yeah, that was a really elegant way of fitting the square peg into the round hole, wasn't it?
It sounds like there's a lot of problem solving that goes on then in the sessions. So you've got this idea that you bring what you want to happen. We then have to sort of overlay the law on it, and then we have to try and work out how we can fit those two things together as well, which sounds like it's a very kind of practical process as much as it is a legal one. I guess that's something that we're trying to bring to this, isn't it? That if you do things amicably, you just open up the possibilities so much more than going through a very reductive legal process where all you're concerned about is what the law says strictly and what you can and can't allow.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you benefited from that, being able to be a lot more creative. I mean, you sound like very creative people anyway. So it sounds like it was a good match kind of personality and process wise.
Yeah, well, we'd had to talk a lot between the meetings, I think, and thrash things out. We weren't using Anthony as like a referee, because between each other we're like, well, let's figure this out. Blah, blah, blah. So we could largely bring him, right, well, this is kind of what we want to do. This is how we understand it. He would then kind of bring that legal thing, I can fit that in there or whatever. And I think that is probably a fairly key bit of the process. You do have to talk quite a lot between those 6 meetings. So obviously you have to be like getting on well enough to do that. But yeah, I mean, we're just competitive, right? If we can't have the best marriage, we're going to have the best divorce. Like, we're going to win something.
I like it. That's good. I think that's a really interesting point, that you do have to be able to communicate between the sessions to really get the most out of these. Otherwise, as you say, time is limited. You've got 6 sessions, or if you're on our negotiation package, you've just got 4 sessions. So you have to be able to do some work in between to keep the process moving. And you're right, the divorce specialist isn't acting as a referee or somebody who's going to make judgment on somebody who's right and somebody who's wrong. That's not how the process works. So I think it's really useful just to draw that out. So as the process kind of moved on and you were sort of making these decisions about money and property, how did you come to an agreement in the end? What were the things that made a difference to you?
I think for me, actually thinking beyond what I'm going to do when my children are not at home being educated was really profound. It's such an intense way of life that I just kind of got my head down. I was like, I love this, but it's my whole world. And so I really recommend having a chance to like think about a long-term plan. And I was like, right, what am I going to do when I need to be financially independent? Like, what am I going to do? And it was so helpful to me to think about that, because it just hadn't occurred to me, because I was so immersed in the reality of looking after my children all the time. I just want to say one other thing as well that I found really, really important about Anthony and the amicable process was that because he, and by extension the company, is not partisan, it means that like I felt hugely empowered because I wasn't permitted to be a victim. Like, I don't want to be a victim, but I think it's a very easy state to fall into. And having somebody who's just like, no, we'll work out what's best for everyone and what's best for the children, it's just super refreshing.
Yeah, that works. Definitely works both ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, because you can fall into victimhood, particularly if you're in a weaker financial position. It can be very easy to overlay those labels. But there are pros and cons to whether you're bringing the money or bringing the childcare or whatever. And sometimes we focus so much on people being in a weaker financial position that we forget about the other kind of sacrifices that the person bringing the money makes as well. And so you're right, it works both ways. So trying to get that state where it's not anyone's fault, no one's in a better or worse position. There are just different factors, and it's like a jigsaw. We have to fit together somehow. Everybody's got to be housed. Everybody's got to have enough money to live on day to day. Everybody needs to be able to retire at some point. Everybody needs, at some point, potentially a career. And there are roles that are going to change within the lifespan of your divorce, aren't there? So it's like a really complicated jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? And Joe, from your perspective, how did it feel to try and make these arrangements around childcare and around money earning?
I mean, I'm quite lucky, and in the job that I do is quite well paid. And I guess if it wasn't, we just couldn't do it, right? We just have to send them to school and whatever. But I'd gone into teaching, which then put me right back down to like scraping by type of money, especially as then the cost of living was all crazy. But I was lucky that the industry was in a bit of a desperate phase. There was recruitment was like awesome. It was not too tricky to get a new job. So once I'd kind of got that, I was like, all right, then, yeah, we're going to be fine. Then it was like, flat hunting and all the usual stuff. But I think I wanted to live close enough that, I could walk to the house or cycle there. It's a little bit of a way for that, but it's totally doable. And we fell quite easily into an arrangement of like visits and stuff so that we got to, I'd see them at least 2 or 3 times a week. And we have this like one-on-one time on Monday nights where we each have one each and we swap each week. So that was all good. I mean, I always wanted to like live with my kids forever. I'd love to live with them. It's not ideal, but it feels like they just like this place now. This is like the cool flat with all the toys in. So I don't feel bad. And they love the cottage. I never feel bad dropping them off. I never feel bad when they're being, when they're transitioning. Transitions don't seem to be too bad, but we just gave it a go. But I think because we were working through everything amicably, the kids didn't really care. They were fine. They just were like, all right, this is a thing. Like they had no concept for what that meant or that it, I don't remember it being too difficult when I moved out or anything. It was like, oh, there's a flat now. There's a cool place. There's another thing that we can go to. And so, yeah, but working out the money, I think we had a few moments where obviously we weren't sure if I'd be able to financially swing it because I have to cover 2 entire situations essentially. And, that's a lot. But yeah, once I got the new job, it did sort of go, okay, right, I think we can see our way through to this now.
I think it's probably testament to the fact that the kids, like you say, seemingly not caring. I think that's testament to the fact that you've created that atmosphere where you've normalized what's happening, and you're just allowing them to see the positives of this. And they obviously feel loved by both parents. They know they've got a home with both parents. What's not to like? You've created a situation where you've minimized any negative impact. And we know from all the research that it's not the divorce itself, it's not seeing one parent and it's conflict that damages children rather than divorce of itself. And you're just testament to the fact that when you do it really well, you can minimize the impact. And it sounds like your kids are thriving in 2 different homes that have different kind of feelings and sort of stuff around them, and they can swing between the 2 homes. You make it easy for them to transition and simple for them to transition. And I think kids are led by how we present things to them, and I think that's, you are doing it really well, obviously, if you feel that they are being able to thrive with and very little or no negative impact on them. So kudos to you both. It's easy to say and hard to do, very hard to do.
Yeah, I think with the transitions, normally whichever one's dropping them off comes in and there's a bit of a chat, and it's all kind of, rather than like, oh, I'll stand at the gate and like send them in, which is more what I had growing up, where, yeah, like dad would kind of hove into view at the end of the drive and we just had to walk out there. So it just feels true. And I guess because we were already quite independent, even when we were taught together, didn't even look that different. It didn't look that different to them, really.
Yeah, it was all quite gradual.
It's really interesting when you can compare the 2 different experiences you've had as well, isn't it? When you can say, as the child of divorced parents, actually being dropped at the end of the drive had such a, it felt visceral, clearly, and therefore to want to go out and do something very different. And the smallest little things, it just might seem like a real small detail, but to be walked to the door and walked in and it not to be an issue, just to make it a very normal thing that you're coming in and handing over children and having a chat and then leaving again, that changes the cultural dynamic of the family, I guess, from what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just really, it's really lovely. I think it's really important to have like frequent visits rather than kind of these extended, hours and days at a time. And it's just great for me as well because it gives me a break. And I know when those breaks are going to be and that I have them and that I can do what I want in that time. So it works for everyone. Like I am more recharged by the time that they come back from Joe's, and he's obviously had a lovely time with them too.
Yeah, they do seem, pretty good with it, don't they?
Just how old are your children, just to give it some context as well? Because I guess that, how you share children and share the care of the children rather is sort of age dependent a lot of the time. So how old are yours without too much detail?
So they're 10 and 6. So the youngest was kind of 3 when we split up. But although we split up, we then cohabited for another 18 months before Joe moved out to the flat. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have lived with someone who I'd split up with for a year and a half. I'm just like, no, it was okay. We did it, and again, I think it's those values of kind of respect and compassion are really important. And if you have those, things that technically seem extremely difficult are workable.
Yeah, I think that shared sense of values is what gets you through, isn't it? And being able to agree some boundaries and ground rules around how you share a space when you're no longer together and what that means for your kids as well. I think all of those things are doable, but you've got to come at it with the right mindset. I mean, we're painting a very ideal picture, aren't we, here? And that's great because for some people this works. Let's dig down then. What was the hardest thing for each of you throughout this process? Kate, what did you find most challenging or most difficult?
I found getting the finances to be how I was comfortable with them really quite tricky, because I was very lucky in that I inherited some money and I always had my own money that I just had. And, it helped to buy our house. And so that was wonderful, a wonderful gift to have been given. And I don't take it for granted. But then, eventually, even though I was quite careful with it, eventually it did run out. And so then when Joe and I parted, and it was like, right, now I am financially dependent on someone and I don't have any of my own in the bank. That was really hard. And it took us about a year to work out like how much a kind of household allowance would cost, so that I had like a monthly payment to cover the food and the petrol and stuff. It doesn't cover the bills because the bills changed so much that we've kept those coming out of Joe's wages, because, it's not easy to predict what they will cost one month to the next, and that would be a lot of like each month like finicking around. But he always makes sure that he sends me the emails from like the electricity company so that I know what is being spent, so I have that visibility. And I think that's really important. So yeah, we had like a bit of a sticky year where I would buy something and then always be like, oh, can you pay this back? Lots of like micro transactions. I wouldn't recommend that. But once we had worked out the monthly allowance, that eased that considerably. And as the children are getting older, there are more like little bits of work that I can do. And I'll build that up as they, get into the later teens, so that then when I'm not home educating them anymore, I'm not starting from nothing. And that was another thing that this process really helped me to kind of realize. And that, Joe was also quite passionate about, that I make sure that I have got those footholds ready for me to step out into financial independence in a decade or so.
So I guess that sounds like it is difficult to remain dependent on somebody when you're divorcing, but it might be necessary for a period of time to achieve some of the bigger goals. But as you say, keeping your eye on the future and preparing for that point when you can achieve financial dependence, that sounds like it's pretty pivotal in a successful settlement from what you're saying.
Yeah.
Nice. Joe, what about you? What did you find hardest?
I almost feel like it was the same thing, to be honest. Like, we had this really nice financial arrangement, when we were together. That was fine. But then when we're not a couple anymore, it was like, oh, well, obviously I want that to be okay. And trying to constrain the dependence to a fixed period of time. So trying to make sure that that period of time had some sort of idea of transition. We sort of change it to more what I guess most people would recognize, where Kate gets works in the more traditional sense, gets universal credit, that kind of thing, and is then financially independent in a more of a traditional way. So trying to get that figured out, because we'd sort of built this system where we were totally dependent on each other and we had to like try and cut it really carefully. So yeah, I think it was basically the same thing. I knew for myself, well, I got my job and I'll still have my job. Like, this is all right. And I can do whatever I need to do. I wasn't too worried about myself in that regard. So yeah, it's all about trying to figure out that. I was trying to figure out that transition.
I think it's really interesting listening to you both speak that it's not just about getting an immediate solution. It's about trying to think through the transitions and as the kids grow and everything else. That's been absolutely pivotal and vital in coming to an agreement that doesn't just work for the here and now, but works and is future proof. So it feels like that's quite an important part of the process to make sure you're not just thinking about, I've got 2 kids who are 3 and 6 or whatever at this point, and therefore this is what it needs to look like. And I guess the other part of that is the process, because you're working together, because you're having to communicate, you're having to test ideas. It's giving you those skills to be able to do that even when amicable stepped away and you're kind of left to it on your own in 5, 10, whatever years' time. You've built up that ability to do this because you've done it with us first, and now you can go on and do it on your own, and you're not tied then, are you, to having to come back to us or a lawyer or somebody else to renegotiate the agreement. So it sounds like that whole process is really geared to giving you the skills to move through this at any point.
Yeah, I feel confident that we can just keep those conversations going as we need to. We thought about 17 different scenarios for like, what happens if I get a partner, what happens if this, what happens if that. So we've had a chance to think about all of those things. And then having thought about them, we can just put them in a box and then be like, as it is now, this is what we're doing.
And you have moved on, haven't you, Joe? You have a new partner, is that right?
Yeah.
So how have you navigated that then? Because that's often a point at which things can become tricky and can get unpicked. So what enabled you to navigate a new partner, the two of you?
Well, that was that was so random because it was as lockdown was like kind of coming to an end, but then it kind of got going again. And I met this lady online because a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you want to get on there?" Because as they'd sort of seen that we'd been like separated for ages, even though we hadn't really done it. And yeah, so I met Jenny, and it was like it was weird. The chemistry was just like magic, but we only actually got to see each other like 7 times in person in the like 3 months or something. Like we'd video chat quite a lot. But it was great. I mean, the kids, she works with kids, and so she's just amazing with the age group that our kids are. I mean, she's just spectacular. So they absolutely adore her. That was easy peasy. Kate facilitated this very well. If I was because she lives quite a way away, I have to drive there to Exeter. It's quite a way. So then, Kate would like, I'll have the kids. That's fine. And then obviously we had to work the routine of visits around the fact that I now live in sort of 3 places almost. But yeah, it was all kind of fine. I think because neither of us were hanging on to each other as a partner, there was nothing to be jealous of, really. I mean, I must admit, I would have thought that we would just want to be on our own for a while. Each of us is like, right, we've done the dependent thing, couple thing, let's have a break. But somehow, I don't know, it kind of got going, and it's just been a really different experience. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. If you can find people who actually match better for where they are in life at that moment, in our sort of late 30s, early 40s, rather than me and Kate who met when we were 19, it can be all kind of amazing again. So, I mean, the kids absolutely love it, don't they?
Yeah. So sweet.
Well, Kate, what's enabled you to take that on board, and how do you work it when there's another person involved with your children? So I imagine that can bring up quite strong feelings of concern or jealousy or whatever. So how have you managed those feelings?
So I'm really lucky in that I just don't struggle with jealousy. I never have. Like when Joe and I were together, he would go salsa dancing. He would have, these wonderful, amazing experiences every week dancing with other women. And I always knew that it was respectful and that he wasn't pushing the boundaries. And so it has never been a feature of my existence. I am quite unusual in that I'm super, super supportive of Joe's not very new now, like it's an extremely well-established relationship. I think it's awesome. I think it's so lovely to see Joe with the right person. And I'm just like, oh, you guys, they've got like similar interests. They love hanging out together. And yeah, I'm just super happy. I'm super happy for the boys that they've got like someone new in their life that cares for them. I think it's a really positive experience. And, I think it's really, really vital for me to respect the fact that they have that positive relationship with Jenny, and that is not about me. That is about them. So if there's things that I need to do because they are too young to do themselves to express their love for her, then that is important that I do those. And it's, yeah, I am quite unusual in that way, but yeah, just super supportive.
I think one of the things that makes it easy for us both is that me and Kate trust each other pretty implicitly to look after the best interest of the kids. I'm not going to take up with someone who's going to disturb it. And I know Kate wouldn't either, right? Like if she was someone came along and then they started causing problems, I know they're gone because I trust her implicitly in that regard. And I think that's, that generally works both ways, which is kind of how this has worked generally, because it's like, well, I know that we have our own interests, obviously, to some degree, but I know that neither of us wants to play games with the other. So, yeah, I think that's made that relatively straightforward.
Wow, so you can't have too many people in your kids' lives that love them, can you? So, like you say, Kate, if there are ways you can facilitate that extra love for your kids, what's not to love? It's incredible. And the opportunities, as you say, to round them off by giving them the opportunity to be with different types of people and see different relationships working is just a gift. So if you can embrace that, as you clearly, the two of you do, then I think that only has positive outcomes for your children and makes them stronger adults as well. So all credit to you. It's such a lovely story to hear.
I distinctly remember when my dad first got with the girlfriend he then had for like 10 years. I loved this woman. It was great. I mean, she turned out to be crazy in the end, and it was like all a bit of a disaster. But I think kids intuitively are like, oh, more grown-ups. This is good.
Yeah, more attention.
It wasn't... You see it on the movies where it's always like, oh, you're the new, and like, I've just never seen that. I have never seen that happen. Kids by default are quite happy to just adopt new people, and there's just more love to go around. So yeah, and obviously we've carried that on. That's really nice. But yeah, I distinctly remember that as a kid, starting well enough.
Yeah, but it's like you say, more love to go around. That's got to be a good thing. I'm really conscious of the time. Now, what advice would you give people, both of you, if they're listening to this, they're wondering how on earth they're going to kind of start off their separation or divorce? What are the tips?
I would say consider relationship counselling before things get really bad. I think there's a lot less stigma around accepting counselling in our society now, which I think is great. I think having somebody who's a professional, non-biased listener is really important. And I also think that it would be really good if people had a relationship checkup and saw it as a bit like if you were going to go to the dentist or something, you would go to the dentist for like maintenance, and then you would also go to them for more dramatic work. But people don't do that with relationships. They only go for the dramatic stuff. And I think actually I would really recommend that people check in with their relationship with a professional when things are a bit rocky rather than very rocky.
Yeah, relationship counsellors are cheaper than lawyers.
Yeah, by a long way. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I also think that it's really important to be aware that each person can be in charge of their own thoughts and their own stance. And it is always possible to choose gratitude, to look for the good things, to celebrate people's strengths, and that they might not be the same strengths that we have, but they do exist. And just because two people are not romantically involved anymore does not mean that they can't be teammates and they can't be co-parents. So yeah, I would just say it can work, and it's important to know that it can work, it can be done.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, that's the purpose of having podcasts like this, isn't it? For people to be able to come on and show everybody else that they can do it and it can work, and to be a role model. So thank you. What about you, Joe? What do you think? What tips would you give somebody listening to this?
I guess we were lucky in that, it never got too explosive before we kind of called it a day. But let's say it has. I think each person has to go, right, with the pressure of trying to be a couple, these things drive me crazy. You have to kind of put all of that down and go, right, now that that's removed, you're going to separate. That's fine. Try and now reestablish the common ground you do have and just build on top of that, because there'll be aspects that of being Kate would drive each other mad as a couple, but they don't matter now. It doesn't matter. And so you sort of have to like put all that away and just go, right, resentments about this, that, the other, just put it down for a bit. and just re-establish the common ground, and then, the goals. I mean, there's a reason your first session is the goals, right? Because that's almost doing exactly that, really. And then, the things that it then gets easier to kind of create that like emotional distance from those things that were more difficult. But I think if you look at it selfishly, to get the best results for yourself, working with the other person as much as you can, you will still get the best result for yourself. I mean, that's perhaps the headline for me. If you're sort of stuck on the fence with it, you're like, well, you can each employ your own attack dogs, but then they're going to spend a load of your money doing what you could probably do in your own living room. And you really only need them to keep the legal stuff on the track, really, with the odd bit of haggling. So every situation is going to be different, but those are probably my two headlines.
Yeah, I agree. I think goodwill helps everyone. Like, it helps the children, it helps the people in the couple, it helps everybody around, because they can relax. Everyone has like friendly supporters, but they don't have to be supporting one person at the expense of another. They can just relax about that and be like, oh no, it's okay. It's okay, because there's goodwill between them. So we don't need to feel defensive of this person.
Yeah. I think if you can take the defensiveness out and the fear out, there are just so many more possibilities. And when your back's against the wall, and you have had a situation, obviously, where it's been very tight financially and you've had to make some sacrifices and sort of really hard decisions. When you're in that scenario, if you can remove the fear and you can remove the sort of suspicion out of that, and you can just go with the goodwill, the possibilities become much greater, don't they? And then you can create, as you two have, a really wonderful situation that works for everybody. So I agree. I think it's that whole sense of goodwill. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. It's been an absolute treat and a thrill to talk to you both today and to listen to how this can work and how you can do things in such a positive and amicable way. If anyone's listening and they want some help with separation or co-parenting issues or support with divorce, then please visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources or book a free advice consultation. And if you want to hear more of the podcast episodes, you can subscribe for updates and visit thedivorcepodcast.com, or you can listen on your favourite listening platform. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Joe, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for listening.